Hey guys, this is Bales. I'm at DraftKings and going to break down a lineup that I had from last night in the Big Gold Glove. This was a $1,500 buy-in, I believe, and I was lucky enough to win $50K to first. Barely won. You can see 5 points ahead of even fourth, so that's a 35K swing. So these, even though the payouts have gotten flatter over time, still just a dramatic difference. So when you can put yourself in a good position in these things, and then really it's just a lot of variance finishing first, or if someone decided not to enter this contest and had a higher score or something, just a really big swing. So I've been in past years, I think, a little unlucky with some of the finishes and things that have happened in this year. Probably more than made up for it with some really just lucky finishes. And yeah, there's most of this result is just running well. So I went with a Yankees stack yesterday, which I knew would be low owned. I actually went stacked 1 through 5: Gardner, Sanchez, Holiday, Castro, Judge, and I'm typically not doing that. The 1 through 4 and the 1 through 5 stacks are by far the most popular on both DK and FanDuel, substantially popular than any other stack, and in a vacuum that makes sense. But because of that, there's just certain situations, generally on a really high-owned team, that it's not like I'm purposely going to always avoid it, but I would say I use 6 and 7 hitters, probably more so than some other players. But in this case, we knew that the Cubs game was going to be really high-owned, and I knew that at least certain Yankees would be very low-owned. So Gardner 1.5%, for example, and scoring 17 points is really valuable, and figured that this stack would be unique. This also isn't a $3 buy-in with tens of thousands of people. There's only 200 people, so it wasn't, it just didn't matter as much to me I didn't think I was going to really run into lineup overlap with that. And then because of that, I used some super chalk pitchers who I knew would be very highly owned. So you can see here. So this is the ownership last night in the 1500. Chris Bryant 60%. So I didn't think it would be that high, but what you do see in these big buy-ins is sometimes I think most people are entering only one time, and it's a lot of money, obviously, for anyone. And I think people approach it differently than they would a smaller buy-in, because there's more value in just cashing. Like, they want a return on that. And so you see ownership on chalk even higher. I think a big reason is just people are better players, obviously, at higher stakes, and so that you're going to see the better plays be higher owned. But I also do think that part of it is people are a little bit scared to go against the grain as the stakes increase. There's some people who that money just doesn't matter, and I don't think that really influences them. But you have at least a handful, and probably a pretty decent percentage of the field who last night was going to be basically stacking the Cubs, or using a lot of reds because of that wind at Wrigley. And if I had another lineup, I actually probably would have done the same, but I thought with one that they would be overowned, and I would just take on the variance, and probably they would go off and I would lose. But if they didn't, then I'd be in a really good spot. And obviously Chris Bryant, I think he only had 2 points. So when he's that highly owned, and you have a bunch of really highly owned guys in Cubs stacks, and you have 50 or 60% of the field, that's more or less drawing dead, then it's just a really good spot. So that's how, you know, I'm able to win with a score of only 147, which is not good. It's not like my lineup killed it. Even my Yankees stack for scoring 11 runs, not really that many fantasy points. The most fantasy points actually came from a Reds player, who I thought was just so good of a value that it was I was fine rostering Cozart, and the complementary pieces that I put in with a low-owned stack, I also thought would be low. So Carpenter 1%, only one other lineup with him, and Seager at 3%, both of whom were awful. So yeah, the one of the reasons that I liked, so you can see the wind was blowing out here. That was a minor consideration. It was also generally good hitting weather, pretty hot, and I've looked at the weather for a long time. That was probably like what I thought was my first edge when I started playing. Now I think most people are aware of it. You can also see the Yankees opened at 4.3 implied runs, and at one point near lock they were up to 4.9. So it wasn't reverse line movement or anything, but they were moving up a bunch, and they were still they weren't getting a huge number of bets. So there was 61% of bets were coming in on the Yankees. So the fact that they moved up that much, I thought was interesting, and maybe there were some people smarter than I am who liked the Yankees last night, yeah, so that was a big reason for that. And you can see here with the pitchers, top two in my model. If you sort by K prediction, they were second and third in that, and for the price, very cheap relative to that, and also very cheap relative to the opponent implied runs. This is the biggest predictor of ownership by far, even more so than strikeouts. So I knew that it was going to be really high, especially obviously in the in this buy-in. So if you look, you have 24%. Matt Shoemaker 44 to in the $8 all the way up to 60%. In the 1500, and 24% to 41.5%. So these guys ranked very highly in the GPP grade, which is just sort of a measure of the difference in ownership across stakes. And yeah, like I said, because of the other complementary pieces, I was fine with going chalkier at pitcher.